me for a walk under the sycamore trees in the dark trees that blow. Dark trees that blow.
Welcome to Twin Peaks Unwrapped. I'm your host, Ben Durant, and beside me is
Brian Kazaska. And Ben, it's been a couple weeks since we had a Ronnie Rocket special, and we didn't know if that was it, but two of our favorite people in the world, David Bushman and Mark Evans, wrote a great book, Murder at Teals Pond, and we figured, hey, we should have them on the show.
and this is like years in the making. I mean, I've been hearing about this book for a long time, so I'm so excited that we get to read this, and now we get to talk about it, and this is so great. Thank you guys for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Congratulations on having the book on January's pick for Oxygen's book club. How'd you guys find out about that? And I had no idea Oxygen had a book club. So how did that all happen for you guys?
Our publisher is Thomas and Mercer, and they have in-house publicity, and they also hire, at least for us, they hired an outside contractor with a company called Dandelion, woman named Courtney, they've been great, and they've gotten us a lot of attention and a lot of interviews, and they got, I think it was Kristen at Thomas and Mercer who got the Oxygen Book Club gig, I guess, for us, which was a great thing for us. We did an interview with them recently, and that went really well, and that is really exciting news.
Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't know they had a book club either, but now I do.
That's awesome.
It's so awesome. So congratulations again. That's an accomplishment. To be on a book club's list of any, that's great.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd love to start this off kind of seeing how you guys got together and came out with this book. But starting off with, way back in March 23rd, 2016, the first time I had heard about Hazel Drew was from Mark's podcast, Dear Meadow Radio. And I don't think I remember hearing anything about that, but you decided to put a show together just on Hazel Drew. And first of all, Mark Frost didn't call her Hazel Drew, it was Hazel Gray. So Mark, you want to briefly talk about that and maybe kind of go from there and talk about how we got to the book?
Yeah, you're right. So we were talking about a little bit before the air. It's almost 5 years since the return. That's kind of what got us all of us, I think, kind of going in this business or whatever we're doing here. But yeah, I was doing Dear Meadow Radio in anticipation of the new season of Twin Peaks and digging around, looking for things to, kind of uncover things that hadn't maybe been discussed. And with Twin Peaks, so much of it over the years had been, really covered. But I think when we came back, what we had that we didn't have back in the 90s throughout that period was the internet. We were able to kind of make all these other connections. Back in the day, you had wrapped in plastic and, that was about it. Maybe some basic primitive news groups, I guess, at the time also. But yeah, looking at the origins of Twin Peaks, I was kind of, looking through the traditional analysis.
You were trying to get into the pilot, I think.
The pilot, yeah, that's what it was.
The pilot.
Well, I had a big plan, I was going to systematically go through everything. We got through the pilot, I guess. I don't know how much farther we got. But yeah, looking for inspirations, the origins behind the pilot, and looking at things like their past work. Frost had done a movie. What was that movie? The Believers, not too long before that. Lynch had done Blue Velvet, both, kind of tied into Twin Peaks in a way. But yeah, the one thing that was kind of unique that, made my eyes jump open. And, in parallel, David was kind of working on a book, Twin Peaks FAQ, in a similar way, looking in, unexplored areas, explored areas, unexplored areas. And we both kind of saw Frost. There were two or three actually looking around references to this, like you said, Hazel Gray. but very little information associated with it. In the interview, there wasn't any like follow-up or anything. I think most of these were, I'm not sure now. Oh, it was the 25th anniversary USC retrospective was sort of a notable one, where he referenced this, but they just kind of kept on. It might have been, and it was referenced once or twice over the years as well. For the podcast, I really wanted to find out if this was a true story. The way Frost talked about it was kind of like a ghost story, something his grandmother had told him to kind of scare him, stay out of the woods. And I spent a weekend for the podcast. This is back when, knee deep in Deer Meadow Radio, just on the internet, using what little facts that Frost had provided to see if I could find a real case that had occurred 100 years ago around this time frame. And the big key, like you alluded to, was that Frost had got the name wrong. It was not Hazel Gray, it was Hazel Drew. And so the way I came upon that was I kept the Hazel in the search engine, took out the Drew, and then all of a sudden, with those other facts, all of a sudden now I'm finding actual newspaper articles, and there was a plethora. So that's kind of how I got started.
And Mark, I just want to say, it was funny, on the podcast, you said, it wasn't like there was a book about this murder that you could just open up and read. You had to find these articles and put them together. But it's funny to start off saying, hey, there's no book, and then you and David come together and make a book.
That is funny. I remember also saying at the time, because I just started looking into this, I was supposed to be looking into Twin Peaks and was going to get to episode 1 and 2 and, kind of keep going like that. I do remember another quote that this is going to turn into the Hazel Drew podcast, which, in a sense, with the twists and the turns, that's what happened there. So, yeah.
I'm just going to keep throwing things at you guys, but it's so funny that so the summer of the summer of 2016, it was the Great Southern Twin Peaks Festival in Richmond, Virginia. And you guys were both there. And I ran into Mark on the street and he's like, hey, how you doing? We met each other because we've done, we did the podcast, but we never saw each other in person. We say hi, and then Mark is gone. I don't think you actually saw David when he was there, were you? You didn't see, were you?
I didn't speak to him. Speak to him. What happened was I went to a panel. I think David was with his book at the time. So I did listen in on his panel. But what happened, Ben, I think shortly after we met, is I noticed my wedding ring was missing. Very Twin Peaks. And I spent, the next 12 hours or whatever it was trying to find, which I never did. So that's why I kind of disappeared from all the festivities. I think is what happened.
I just want to say that's perfect, because if I could count all the times that Mark left something behind, we were going from place A to place B. Usually his computer, but I think his wallet at one time.
Man.
So many things to keep, so many things.
That reminds me of me and Ben. How many times Ben would show up to record, be like, I forgot my earbuds, I dropped them somewhere, I forgot my computer. Like, he would be always,
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of like teenage daughters,
All right.
And David, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself. Do you want to briefly say, what is your book? I mean, I just assume everybody already knows what we're talking about. Maybe you want to briefly say, what is your book about?
Murder at Teals Pond is about the 1908 murder of Hazel Drew, which Mark Givens just referenced. And it was one of two real crimes that influenced Mark Frost when he wrote the Laura Palmer arc, or when he was conceiving the Laura Palmer arc of Twin Peaks, the original Twin Peaks. And he says that he mentioned it to David Lynch, but he doesn't think Lynch remembered it. So we're talking about Mark Frost here, not David Lynch, who has his own obsessions. And so it was an unsolved murder. She was a governess, not a governess, but a homemaker, or a domestic servant, they called it back in the day. And she lived in Troy and worked for some of the most powerful people in the city. And one day she disappeared, and they found her body, 4 days later, Mark, in a pond, which is, again, sort of evocative of Laura. They went about, trying to figure out who had killed her, what she was doing there. There's tons of mysterious questions. And, Mark Givens and I kind of spent 5 years trying to get to the bottom of it as best we could. Mark Frost was really helpful to us. We interviewed him for a piece on that ran in the Washington Post around the premiere of The Return about Hazel. And He also wrote the foreword to this book.
Yeah,
That's pretty
nice.
cool. And David and Mark, just to go back, because I'm so interested to know when you guys finally crossed paths. And I was telling Ben back in October 2016, we went to the Mark Frost book signing, and we met with you, David, for lunch. But Mark, you were there early, and I remember the four of us finding a place, and I believe it's the first time you guys ever met. And I also remember, Mark, you talking about Hazel, Drew, Hazel Gray at the time. Now, did you guys, I can't remember, was the idea of this brought to your attention from each other
Together.
at that time? Was that the time you guys started talking about this?
I don't remember. Do you, Mark, remember if at that point we had already?
Oh yeah, you're exactly right though, Brian. That was the first time we had met.
Wow.
We had spoken over the phone, which David just kind of, I don't know how that happened, Twitter or something, got in touch with me, and then we had a brief call, just saying I had been looking at, kind of what we were just talking about there. At that point, I wasn't even really thinking necessarily a book. I was like, oh, this is a blockbuster movie, or really, from the start, I always saw it as like, at the time, it was like, Mad Men and those kind of quality limited run shows, 13 episodes, a season or two. I was very naive, it's not so easy to just off and run in with the TV show. So when David brought up the book, and we still kind of have ambitions. We had some initial discussions along those lines. Basically, people wanted to see the story first and see the book. So that's how that path kind of came before us. And
okay.
Yeah,
That's
but
cool.
no, back to your question, that was I think maybe we were solidifying our plans at that time. We had kind of like spoke over the phone, and that day in Borders or whatever that was.
Yeah, Mark, I know that day, if I'm not mistaken, you talked about how you wanted to bring something to Mark Frost's attention about this. Or you wanted to clarify with him. Can you remember what you said to him and what he said back to you? What was?
Yeah, I think I just introduced myself, but he shot up with. And then I think it was just like over, we were in a Borders for 12 hours.
Yeah.
It was just over. But he did come back to me with, go look into, some hotel or something.
The boarding house.
Or, all right,
Wow.
David, you remember? Because I'm sure I brought it up.
I just remember you telling me, that, you were very, I don't want to say fixated, but you really wanted to explore the boarding house. Because
he just jumped up and was like, oh, make sure, I think I was on my way out the line, and he kind of called me back and said, go check that out.
Oh.
I think we did somehow, David or something did kind of follow up, and it wasn't like, he had the missing piece. It was just something he had kind of, heard to check into. And I think we looked at it, but if you start to get into the story, that's the story. There's rumors and twists and turns and suspects all over the place. So I think he just had another one that maybe speaking to his friend
John
Walsh, who was really involved in the research and connected us, but with Mark Frost beforehand, helped him look into this when I think he was working on Twin Peaks. Was another guy, so that might have been where it came from.
I didn't even know what he meant by boarding house, but what it turned out to be was a place where a lot of single women, I think, and single men would spend like a week, if they had a week summer vacation, they would spend a week there. And Hazel made a lot of friends through the boarding house, and also some male admirers through that as well. People she stayed in contact with because they found letters to and from those people in her trunk later on. So there was definitely something there to pursue. But Mark Givens is right in that I think Mark Frost knew very little about this at that point. He knows a lot more about it now because he's read our book. But he was just kind of throwing out an idea, I think.
Yeah.
at that point.
I don't think it made the book.
Washington Post,
Unfortunately.
that Washington Post article that you wrote, you interviewed Mark Frost, but you also interviewed Scott Frost.
Yeah.
Was there anything from Scott that you were able to get, or was it very similar because they both had grandmother who told them the story? Like, was there anything different from Scott that you may have gotten that helped you?
My memory is very similar, a different perspective. They were brothers, maybe Rashman, the experience was a little bit different, but not materially, no. And I don't think it really, that particular story struck a chord with Scott as much. I think David's right. Mark Frost apparently didn't know really any of the facts of the case, but just the idea of this dead girl by the pond, which we're all familiar with, really, really stuck with him. So I think that stuck a chord with him. I'm not even sure, David, do you recall if Scott Frost remembered that particular, I can't remember.
Yeah, I did. The thing that we left out of that story, or because they had, if you remember this, Mark, but there was another part to that story that kind of mitigated this sort of eeriness of it, but there was talk, Mark Frost, or it might have been Scott even, who mentioned that there was this wailing sound coming from the woods, and that, they all thought that this was the ghost, but it turned out to be, does this ring a bell at all, Mark? It turned out to be a calf that had its leg stuck or something like that. So this kind of wailing sound was reinforcing the idea of this ghost being there. But, that always...
Was that like a separate kind of, they were walking by the pond at one point and then heard a sound, but nothing, it turned out to be nothing. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that does ring a bell.
Well, I'll say, this book, for me, I feel like probably Brian too, we're pretty happy people and we enjoy a lot of things, but this book really exceeds my expectation of how good it is. Like, it is such a damn good book. Yeah. And like, I'm amazed by how like the details and the research that's put into this, and I feel like there's breadcrumbs and we're being led through the whole thing, and it's so good. I would find myself trying to like solve the mystery myself as being like a detective and say, okay, there's something that seems strange about these family members, and could Hazel Drew be a prostitute, or like you just like write all these like notes down as you're going along, and it's such a really good story. I'm so impressed with you guys and what you guys are able to put together.
It read for me like a true crime documentary. Like, I've watched enough of them in 2020, 2021. But you got your book, to me, as soon as I started reading, I was like, I feel like, I'm like watching a true crime documentary. Like, I think your book lends to that very well. Like, going back to what you're saying, Mark, about like a TV show or a limited series. I mean, I could see that.
When we kind of stumbled upon this, finally found out it wasn't Hazel Gray and Hazel Drew, there was just a story there, a lot of story with all kinds of twists and turns. And I guess, as we were saying, there was, it took us a while, I guess, to figure out how to tell this story, just the different ways you can, writing style or choices. We ended up with, what we termed creative nonfiction. So it is nonfiction and it is all factually based, but we do have these sort of interludes that we felt these were good little character scenes beyond the facts that it helped kind of tell the story. And one of our editors suggested that to us, these little vignettes, which I really enjoyed writing, because you get to know these characters really well. And then you read them, in the paper, they had a meeting, an interrogation. Well, you kind of know who the police were at this point, who the uncle is at this point, what came out of this meeting. So it was just kind of fun to, because they were really strong characters. They were real people. I mean, and we got to know them to a good degree. So that was fun. But what I think you started this question off with, Brian, was, that going along with the investigation, which we were, lucky enough to be right there with, there was a point there, or several points, where we were thinking of like kind of writing it that way. It was suggested it was first person, or we were saying as we went to go talk to somebody. So I'm glad at least some of that, I guess, survived in the format of creative nonfiction. There was another way, I think, when I first started writing, David, I don't know if you remember this draft, but I was almost writing it as a novel, just the facts were there behind the scenes, And I think David's first draft was almost the complete opposite, where it was very factually based. At 7:13, they came around this corner, and I'm like, ooh, the moody atmosphere. I'm sure I was overdoing it. But, so somewhere over those years, came up with, what we came up with a lot of help from our editors and that whole team as well. So I'm glad that came through as well.
Yeah. How did you guys divvy up the work like that? I mean, obviously you guys went to the places together and all that stuff, but I mean, you guys are in 2 different states. How did you guys divvy up the workload? I mean, and it's a big undertaking.
The really good stuff is mine, and the not so good stuff is Mark's.
That makes so much sense.
Wait, I want to say that first of all, you guys have a book, so you know that it's really nice to hear compliments. So thank you for that, and that's also why you guys. I think I've told you this before. You can't stop doing the podcast because you are so supportive of the Twin Peaks community, and that is like a really. For those of us who are out there who have benefited from your support, it's really hugely, we are hugely appreciative. And if you guys ever do stop this, I think that'll be a void that we'll all feel. So, but to answer your question, in terms of the research, well, first of all, we have different strengths. And Mark is a great researcher, and he really gets into that and can just disappear down he uses the expression rabbit hole on one thing, which is really valuable. I mean, I think the issue sometimes with that is that we have deadlines, and sometimes, speaking of the Beatles, I felt a little bit like Paul McCartney trying to get the album together, but I think that the book is so much better because of the way we complement each other. We both went up there numerous times, usually together. I think that, Mark, you may have been up there once without me, and I may have been up there a couple times without you when you were going through one of your crises. But we both were up there a lot together. So that, we had roundtable discussions that were arranged by the Sand Lake Town historian, Bob Moore, who was one of several people up there who were extremely helpful to us. Mark Marshall being the other one who was particularly helpful. And so we both were up there for that. We recorded it. Mark really got into ancestry, checking into the ancestry of these different people. I sort of got off on my own tangents. Like there's a chapter on another crime that involves some of the same people. The Mamie Killian thing was something that we just kind of found what motivated us, and it just turned out to be really complimentary. And I think overall, speaking personally, a really good working experience. I would definitely write another book with Mark.
Nice.
That's great. I love it. Now, did you guys ever hit any roadblocks? Like Mark, with the research, did you ever get to a point where I don't see this book coming together, I'm not finding anything else out, or where you're like, well, we could still end this book, but we might just have more questions and answers?
Yeah, it was such a long process. There wasn't it was more organic, and things kind of developed. So there was always kind of something, to look into. And we didn't really worry about, I don't know, for years, we said it took us 5 or 6 years, whatever it is, to write the book. But really a lot of that was the research and going up there and figuring things out before we, when we sat down to actually put the words on paper. To me, that's when it actually got a little challenging, But the research David alluded to, the rabbit holes, I love that. So you could always just kind of keep looking. And with the technology today, with the internet, with ancestry.com and newspapers.com, you get a name and you could just spend days and weeks on, a name who knew somebody who Hazel dated. You could spend days and weeks, just looking for something on this guy. So there were a lot of gaps to fill, and we just kind of kept accumulating things. I guess before we focused on the solution, which, the first couple years where it kind of went, that we're pretty convinced is a plausible solution. I was not even looking at that sort of set of facts and people in my mind. I had a couple, you know, a couple open possibilities that I thought it could be. And at that point, if we had to write the book, I could have made, you know, here's my case against this guy, or against this situation. I think that's what we maybe both felt. We never were stuck to one thing. I guess when we started talking to publishers, maybe that came up a little bit more, like, oh, do you guys, you know, you plan on solving this? And I did plan on solving it, but not creating things. It's more like, well, we've been looking at it. This is all the things we came up with. And, you know, and that's basically what we ended up doing, you know, for our sort of solution chapter at the end.
Yeah.
Kind of put everything together. Like I said, and I'll throw it out there if you guys have read the book, you know, come at us, you know, I haven't seen anyone say a valid, like, no, this doesn't make sense. You know, I mean, we're open to that. Our thing changed all the time, you know. But what we settled on, we're pretty comfortable with.
I don't want to spoil it, because I think that experience of reading the book is so important. But I do find it interesting that you guys did, like, I went into this book thing, this is an unsolved case. It's not going to be solved. We're going to be left with, and we really don't know who the killer is. But you guys come at it and say, this is our interpretation who it is and stuff. And I think that is so awesome. My question is kind of in the process, you figured out who the killers were, whatever, and then do you go back and kind of lay the breadcrumbs? Or does it work like that? Or is it, do you kind of like say, okay, we got to make sure if we think it's these person or people that they're mentioned in the book? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I'll jump in real quick. When we kind of clicked, and we were like, oh, it looks like this is our guy. Then we started looking into those guys, to that area more. And you look, and then something that may seem innocuous, if you didn't already have this, you know, then it's, oh, well, this is connected. I don't know if that that's in my brain. I don't know if that translated outwards. That's kind of how we build it. David, does that ring true?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I wanted to say that before I answer that question, which is a great question, by the way. But when we were going out to publishers, one publisher said to me, and this is one reason why with Scott Ryan, I formed Fayetteville Mafia Press, but one publisher actually said to me, we don't publish books that don't have the solution. We don't publish histories that don't have a solution. And I said, like, well, have you ever heard of like the Black Dahlia or Jack the Ripper, you know? And so that was like, I mean, so if there are writers out there, like, you know, you're going to run into a lot of publishers who are just going to tell you stupid things, and you shouldn't be discouraged by them. That's the first thing. The other thing is, and this, you know, we've done panels at Awesome Con and New York Comic Con on this book, and you have to be really careful not to give away your ending. Yeah. You know, the New York Post wrote a story that did give away the ending, but the challenge to the question that you asked, guys, is that you want to create suspicion, but you don't want to rule anybody in or out too early. Right. And that, you know, that was really hard to do, because for one thing, you're following an investigation that in the end rules everybody out. So it's a great question, because what you have to do is balance, because I had people after the Awesome Con panel saying to me, I think Mark and I decided that we weren't going to even identify the person or persons we thought were responsible at the panel. Right. And so afterward, I had people coming up to me saying, I think it's this person, I think it's this person. And then I thought, you know, maybe that's not fair. Like, you have to at least include these people among the suspects. And so we did that at New York Comic Con. We changed it around a little bit. But so you want to do that, but you don't want to give away that you think that this was the, you know, these were the perpetrators, or this was the perpetrator. So it's a real challenging balancing act to do that. And
it's somewhat helpful in that the way we did it, kind of like I think we laid it out, but at first we were trying to just document the original investigation, the 2.5 weeks or whatever it was. And that was kind of its own project. I mean, there's going to be overlap, but then it was, well, what did they not look into? What do we have to like look into? So there were sort of like distinct kind of phases behind the scenes, I guess, to this. it all kind of comes in, or a lot of it comes in the solution chapter, but it was a lot more digging, I guess, than reading, than just putting the newspapers back in order.
And there are phases of investigation too, like different suspects pop up at different times, because like Mark said, we followed it pretty chronologically. So we pretty much went with, as they were coming up with clues, we were doing it linear fashion in that way. And there were different phases. There was a guy, there was one guy who I won't name, was definitely a suspect early on, and people were even calling for him to be lynched. And then, later on, they determined that he just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, but he is a suspect in the beginning. So when you're telling that early part of that story, he's in there as one of the suspects.
Yeah. It may have been the introduction that you mentioned Thomas Larson, which is Mark Frost's great-great-grandfather, that you were looking at him briefly. Did you actually eventually talk to Mark and say, hey, we briefly looked at your great-grandfather?
I remember that conversation because I was having a lot of talks with Mark at that time, because I was writing conversations with Mark Frost. And I said to him, I was always trying to get him excited about the book because, we had talked about him doing the forward, and I was afraid that he was going to forget. So I wanted to keep him, emotionally engaged, and he was, and he came through. I know it's a great forward. And, but I remember saying to him that we even came across, one of your ancestors, Thomas Lawson, and he said, don't tell me he did it. That was his response. So, yeah, we didn't want to have that conversation with him.
Thank God we dodged the bullet there.
Yeah.
That forward would have been really different if things were
yeah, that probably wouldn't have been a good thing.
I mean, you guys did a great job of laying the whole thing out, though. I mean, and the journey to your conclusion is like really good. And like I said, when I'm reading it, I got myself lost. I felt like I was watching one of those true crime stuff, because you lay out the characters in the beginning, but I like how you give us the history of these people. They're all people. They deserve for their story to be heard, no matter what. If they didn't or did do it, or the victim needs her story to be told. And it's nice that you gave her, you made her human, not just this woman went missing, you knew nothing about her. Now we know something about her.
That's a really good point. Sorry, Mark, but just quickly that we did hear from one person, I think on Facebook, who said, can't you just leave the woman alone? And the whole sort of point of our introduction or afterward, or one of them or both of them, is that why should we forget Hazel? I mean, right. She didn't get the justice that she deserved, and why shouldn't we remember her? I mean, I think that, but we definitely tried to humanize her. But so guys, you were not, you didn't think it was anomalous or jarring, that whole section on how Lara Flynn Boyle was the better Donner? That didn't bother you?
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I thought that was an odd choice to be in the middle of the book.
Yeah.
David, I don't think that made it past the editor, to be honest with you.
I was happy that there was more mention of Twin Peaks than I thought there would be in this book. I mean, whenever you could, you referenced like, these characters remind me of like Twin Peaks, or that, this was very much like something da-da-da would do. And I thought like, yay, you're coming back. Any chance you get back to Twin Peaks, I thought that was great. Do you see some similarities yourself that when you're doing this, besides a dead body on the lake?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you could almost do a book or something, that was that kind of slant if you were just from the Twin Peaks angle. We thought, the story itself was so powerful. We definitely, acknowledged it with Mark Frost in the forward and the introduction, but in the body itself, we tried, to just keep it to the main, the story of the time. But yeah, if you were anyway familiar with Twin Peaks, and that's what drew us to us originally, the significance of it. But once, like David said, we were up there, 9, 10 total between us up to Sand Lake, New York, which is kind of like East Coast, Twin Peaks. It's like the woods everywhere, and the there's no log lady, but there's, I don't know what it is about it, that the people you the modern people we met, you could kind of get that otherworldly or not the big city kind of feel to them. And then learning about this from 100 years ago, it's like one of the Mark Frost books where he goes back 3 generations, and it's the same family names, and what is it? The Canadian Trapper. I don't. In one of those books, he has his grandfather, and it's based the Renault brothers, I think.
Yes,
the
right.
Renaults from the 1900s or something like that. And we definitely got that feel. There's 2 characters, Frank Smith and Rudy Gundrum, who are these locals. They're the last people to see Hazel alive. Frank knows her. Rudy doesn't know her, but they're the last people to see her out on this lonely road where close to the pond around, it's approaching nighttime. So like great characters, but Rudy Gundrum, who, spoiler, I guess, but doesn't have anything to do with it. He didn't know her unless we really missed something. But just this great character, lived up on the mountain with his moonshine and his rifle and all those kinds of things. And Gundrums are all over the place up there. Rudy had at least a dozen great-great-grandchildren that, we talked to 2 or 3 of them. So in talking to these people, you kind of get a sense, these people, I wouldn't say they're so insulated from the world or anything, but in some sense they are, living up there, and just generations, same names, same people. So that aspect of Twin Peaks, I think, was also, you could find it in the story, just the quirky characters, the uncle and the Aunt Minnie, and I mean, so many of them, really, along with the twists and turns of the story. But yeah, it was great
these
fun.
characters didn't want to share everything. Like I always kept on feeling it's like they're not telling us the whole truth. Like there's something that they're not willing to share with us. Like they want to keep it private. They don't want to tell about like who
secrets, like Twin Peaks, right? That's all over Twin Peaks. Who knows this and what are they not saying exactly? Yeah, that was all over this too, I feel.
There were people who wouldn't talk to us, who just kind of like dismissed us out of hand because of that whole secretive thing. Rudy Gundrum is an amazing character. I mean, we did talk to his great grandchildren or whatever they were. I'm forgetting, but he used to if he didn't like the way one of his kids was cleaning the floor, he would shoot his gun at the floor or something. Another time he had one of his kids to climb on his lap and he let them pull the trigger on his gun, and then he would get drunk so often downtown in Troy that the bartender and the patrons would carry him out, stick him in his wagon, and hit the horse or tap the horse on the back, and the horse would know the way, would drive all the way up the mountain and home. And Rudy was like comatose from drinking in the back. So he was, and like Mark said, there are a lot of the uncle and the aunt. And that's to say nothing of, Sand Lake was a lumber town, like Twin Peaks, and there are actually 2 mountain peaks, 2 peaks in Sand Lake. So it was
a a lumber pond where she was found.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And if they show that picture side by side, I've seen in newspaper articles of Laura and Hazel, and it is kind of eerie, completely coincidental.
And Mark Frost didn't know a lot of the details, but he spent like lots of summers up there as a young kid, and he was soaking up the small town atmosphere. And there's no doubt that he was influenced in creating the town of Twin Peaks by that time that he spent up there. That I think is unquestionable.
Was not we mentioned his grandfather Thomas Lawson before, who was a doctor, small town doctor. Was he not the basis for
No, he was not
show?
A doctor. He was at an engineer at RPI. Lawson. He was.
You're right. I'm thinking there's some kind of the Calhoun Hospital was named after Betty Calhoun.
That guy was a doctor. Yeah, her husband was a doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, I can't remember if we've talked to Mark Frost or where I've heard it, but like, there was like a brothel or something not far from where he was in that area, and that made him think of One-Eyed Jacks, and definitely these weird, quirky characters that I think he kind of maybe brought into Twin Peaks. But yeah, I could definitely see that.
That's a great point. There was a hugely madam up there named Mame Faye, and there's actually a great documentary about her that you can see, I think, on YouTube or on PBS or something, called Sitting on a Million. She was a real character, and they had a red light district down in downtown Troy, which was not far from where Hazel worked at one time. And it was, the police would stand guard over it, and May's workers, her sex workers, would bring out cups of hot coffee to the cops, yeah, so there's, I didn't even think of One-Eyed Jacks when I was writing about that, but that's a great point.
Yeah, right away, that's where my mind was going. It's like, oh, One-Eyed Jack. It's the same thing. Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious now, where are you guys going from here? I mean, I thought there was talk about a documentary or a film, or it seemed like there's something else you guys might be able to do.
The book was written, right, Ben? I remember.
I know, but I'm excited for him, and I feel like you guys should be on high. You guys should be celebrating right now for the book, but I feel like there is a lot of excitement for this book, and I'd be curious to know if there's other things that might be able to do with it.
You're right. We did. We've had discussions. I'm learning. I think the sort of Hollywood, whatever side of things moves a little slower. I guess maybe in some regards, these things can take a long time. We don't have anything actively going on. Like I said, we had some discussions and people were interested and excited, but it was just us sitting in a room kind of talking. We didn't have a book or something to kind of show them. So yeah, we'll catch our breath here and see where we're at. Our sort of partners who kind of helped foster the deal to get us going, there's a company called Synergistic. They were actually working on some form of documentary. I'm not sure where that is or what stage that is, but we do know the gentleman who was working on that. And then on the other side, like I said, it would be great. I can definitely see this. In my mind, it would be a television show because there's so much in there, the twists and the turns, as opposed to a 2-hour movie. And we're just, obviously still kind of in this golden age where there's just content everywhere. They're looking for things like this, and it's got the tie to Twin Peaks, and really in and of itself, it captured the nation 100 years ago, and it was just kind of forgotten. So we'll see. I guess stand by on that. I would throw out there something that we have been planning, and I've just been got busy with the holidays and got sick and everything. But the late great sleeping Deer Meadow Radio may be revived in a sort of a new format. I can't remember if we mentioned this to you guys, but as we said, through this long period, we spoke to all kinds of people, historians, people, descendants from people who were involved in the case, local detectives, local interested parties. So we have basically this huge catalog that was filtered into the book, basically. But thinking another way to get people kind of involved into the investigation and kind of follow us along with planning to kind of revisit those and put those out there for people to hear. I think my favorite of these, we would have these round table, like every time we would go up there for a weekend. The Sand Lake historian, Bob Moore, was the one who basically facilitated this, but he would gather interested parties. We spoke to Hazel the weekend before, 4th of July weekend before she was murdered. She went to go visit first cousins of hers. Where was it at, David?
Schenectady.
Schenectady, thank you. The nearby town Schenectady. And through Bob and all these kind of connections, we were able to speak to her cousin's grandchildren or great-grandchildren. I'm sorry, I get confused. They were actually, kind of amateur detectives themselves looking into this. So they, an FBI investigator, an FBI agent got interested at one point, would show up at these round tables. Have to mention Mark Marshall, who was known as the detective up there. In terms of rabbit holes, I mean, this guy lives in these rabbit holes, and he's definitely still looking at this. He's basically, I think, on board with sort of the solution, but there's, details, and you can just kind of keep going forever. We just got a couple of emails from him recently where he's still, looking at he's trying to track down when Hazel met her first and how she got her first job, basically looking for some more concrete details. Looking at church records, was the employer there. So yeah, this thing, it was great, and it kind of is still going on the back burner, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always having questions still. I'm still kind of like, at one point it seemed like she had more money than she should have. Like, am I right about that? That she could do trips and she had nice clothing, and it's like.
I'll let David answer. I think we actually might disagree a little on this one, David, but I'll let you take a whack at it.
My position would be that you're right, Ben, that she, and that was certainly something that came up a lot during the course of the investigation, that the press made a big deal out of that. She had a really close friend who was a housekeeper across the street or next door, named Carrie Weaver, who was originally from Ohio, but was, working in Troy. They traveled together and saw each other frequently, and she also told the press that we think Hazel was making $4.50 a week, and that Carrie was making a comparable amount. And Carrie herself says to the press at one point that she never understood how Hazel could afford to dress the way she dressed and travel the way she traveled and eat the way she ate at fancy restaurants. And so that was, I bought into that mystery. Yeah.
And I was a little more skeptical. Some of those things, as David mentioned, it was kind of the press that kept putting that out there. And we know the press would hype certain things up. We talked to some local historians who kind of said that traveling around that Hazel was known to do was actually something that people could do within a budget in those days. It wasn't really that expensive. It was something cheap that you could actually do, that young people would do. Carrie, her friend that David mentioned, I saw her a bit of a bumpkin. She was from Ohio, and there was this long quote. I don't know how she does this. They kind of ran with.
You're
and I'm like,
offending people from Ohio.
And what I'm saying, from 1908.
Where's Scott Ryan?
1908.
Scott Ryan.
Yeah.
Whole new thing there. But Hazel, she did grow up in Troy from the age of 14. So, the fact that she could make $1, I don't know. I saw that. I didn't see the police's focus on that. I saw the press. So
right.
We won't really know there. But I think they're looking for areas of dirt. And, if she was good with her money, she was good with her money. I don't know. And another thing to consider is she got free room and board. She lived in these houses with these rich people who then paid her, and she had this money to do what she wanted with. So
yeah.
Speaking of, I was just going to say, Brian, that speaking of Carrie Weaver, there's so many mysteries about Hazel was murdered on a Tuesday night and quit her job on Monday morning before that. And there's so many mysteries about where she was the rest of the day on Monday and on Tuesday up until she was spotted near the pond at 7:30 at night. But one of those mysteries was that she had told Carrie Weaver, with whom the so-called Ohioan country bumpkin, that Carrie was going on vacation for like 2 or 3 weeks, and they were close. And Hazel said she would go see her off at the train station, and she didn't. That was one of the, she never told anybody that she had changed her mind, so that was the whole, a lot of Monday and Tuesday, what Hazel was doing. That's what, some people say, well, couldn't she just have been attacked by some random guy by the pond? And it's possible, but even there's so many strange things that happened leading up to it that it didn't seem likely to me, and I think to us, just because there's so many strange things that happened leading up to it.
I'm sorry, at the very least, if it was some random guy, then there had to be some cover up, because there's all these gaps where she's with somebody and we still don't know what happened. So even if they didn't do it, then they thought they would be found guilty. So, and that's, giving them a lot of
Nobody stepped forward to say that they were with Hazel Monday night. Nobody stepped forward to say they were with Hazel during huge chunks of Tuesday. We still don't know how she got out to the pond or how she was planning to get back, because she had left her suitcase in Troy, and what she was doing at the pond.
Yeah, she spent somewhere Monday night, and they checked all the hotels and everything. So if it was a random thing, then they would have found, some trace of her, I would think.
Or somebody would have come forward and said she was with me on Monday night and, I have an alibi and whatever, but nobody did.
Right.
And nobody reported her missing either between Tuesday and when they found the body. Nobody said, where's Hazel? Or just one weird thing after another.
Right.
Yeah.
And you think about family and things like that. I mean, I guess maybe that's just how her personality was. Like, oh, that's Hazel. She she goes off and does her own thing. I don't know.
That's not a bad thought. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the central point with her. There's almost like two interpretations of all her acts. She's this quiet homebody, or no, she's got all these relationships with all these men. And there's definitely
like Twin Peaks, like Laura Palmer, she had dual life, right? You had somebody
absolutely
sweet and quiet, and then you realize, oh, maybe she had two boys. She had a boyfriend and another guy on the side. You never know. I mean,
and that's all coincidental. Mark Frost and David, they didn't know anything about that. But yeah, in Twin Peaks, it's the Secret Diary or the Secret Diaries. In this, it's that chest of postcards with all these anonymous, or they just used their didn't sign their names, just their initials. So from all these men. So same kind of thing, chest full of secrets.
And the whole mystery man, I mean, like, you think of the pilot of Twin Peaks, you have like Jacoby listening to his headphones, and it's like there's a mystery man in the red Corvette and stuff like that. And you guys kind of have a whole section about the mystery people, and I think that's interesting. I kind of imagined you guys are doing research for that and trying to do like, who was these people that you briefly get their name and trying to figure out who they could have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there were a ton. Did we wind up calling a chapter Mystery Man? We did.
I think so.
Like that, right?
Yeah.
It's called. Like,
and we haven't even talked about that train conductor who was clearly lying about to police. So and the fact that his name and number showed up in her among her possessions, and some people said that he said he never met her, and then he was found meeting witnesses said he was meeting with some woman that looked like Hazel in the train station that may or may not have turned out to be Hazel. But he clearly lied because he said he wasn't talking to anybody. So
I take then that guy had his own business that he didn't want out there, and that's what he was like. I don't think he was. But there's others.
Jack's thing. He had his own.
Don't say too much, Mark. Mark, don't say too much.
Don't say too much, of course. But that's true.
Right. And the interesting about this book is, like, I almost feel like there's like no characters that I trust in some sense. It's like the only people I can trust is Mark Gibbons and David Bushman. I mean, like, you guys telling the story is their best bet of people to trust, which I think is kind of interesting in a way, to go through this and say who is telling the truth and what do I believe. And
yeah, I think that's the nature of it being unsolved, and we came to question the investigators, came to question the press, came to kind of question everybody, because there were unanswered questions all this time later. Somebody at I think the New York Comic-Con, or one of those that we were at, we were talking to them, and they were big true crime fans, and they were pointing out that our story is, we're not with the killer the whole time, which is kind of the traditional true crime, getting into their heads and what drove them to be sick and all this. Ours, we're with the victim, the whole time. We're trying to get to know them. And in my mind, it's kind of a little bit of a subtle difference between maybe, traditional true crime and more like a mystery that I think, draws us a little bit more. As Twin Peaks fans, you're not drawn to the gory side of the killing, it's part of it, but it's the mystery and the unanswered questions and the secrets and all that.
But that's also an interesting point, because we were talking at one point to a production company before. Our publisher, Thomas and Mercer, is owned by Amazon. So Amazon has certain, I think, option rights on this book. So, but before that, we were talking to this production company where I know somebody, and I said, is it a problem, like, that we don't have, this trustworthy person that you can, like an Agent Cooper, for example. And he said, we could, or that it's not contemporary. And she said, you can tell the story, you can use the investigator, the current day investigator, or in this case investigators, and make them characters who are going back, who are doing this research and tell the story through their eyes. So that was pretty much what you just said. Use that to come up with your audience surrogate, I guess.
Yeah.
And the only thing is, I think we've already touched on this, but I really like I think you must have taken some artistic liberties, but I love that it is somewhat of a story. I feel like in some ways I'm reading a novel, because at times there's people who they're like quoted as saying, this is what, I said to so-and-so. And I feel like I'm more engaged in the story, that it isn't just the facts, but I love the facts. So you guys really did do a good job balancing that and all the research you found and being able to put that in and bring it to life.
One thing, about that research, when we found the newspaper articles, we must have had, I had a hard drive crash, so I couldn't tell you right now, but we had 12 or 13 sort of different accounts of this 2.5 weeks. Wow. So you're kind of getting different little facts and different perspectives in each of these accounts. And, that was part of our job to take all that and to put it into one kind of story. And I'm sorry, what was the original question, Ben? I'm sorry.
I didn't say it very well, but I think I was fascinated that you have the facts of saying, here's what happened. But then you have these characters who are also kind of like talking and having a dialogue. And it's not just like the police interrogating somebody. There's sometimes we had a conversation of pulling out of the lake.
So that's what I was getting at. So these different accounts would add these little facts that, maybe wouldn't change who the murderer was or anything like that, but a little anecdote about her uncle being completely disinterested when he heard about that there was a ruckus at the pond that might be his niece. So you get a sense of this guy here, and we're thinking about this, and you get all these other little facts and so many newspaper articles that you would find different direct quotes from these people. So you're getting their exact words, which we used when we created those scenes. We would create dialogue, but if we had quotes that fit, that were central to it, we definitely use them and then just kind of go off of them.
Awesome.
But yeah, I'm really glad. I think there were two things we were trying to accomplish with this. There was, and it kind of goes back to our initial drafts where David was much more fact-driven, kind of like from a journalistic approach, and mine first draft was more, let's just forget the facts. We know them. Let's just tell the story now. Yeah. And I think over the years and many discussions and changes and different approaches, we came up with a sort of a hybrid, this creative nonfiction. And I'm glad, Ryan was, I think, talking about the investigation, but also the story side. I think there are different ways to tell this. It could have been, either if David had gone off and I had gone off, he would have written a more journalistic, and I would have written a novel, and it would have been two different products. But I think because we had these different strengths and weaknesses, we were able to kind of merge, and I think overall it's a better end result.
Yeah, you guys really did complement each other very well.
We were also getting feedback from our editors about which way to go on that too, and I think the editors were telling us to go somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. But there were, like Mark said, there were a lot of quotes in the newspapers, and the inquest was a great place. There was so much that we took directly from the inquest, where papers actually quoted what was going on and what was being said. But I'll give you an example of a situation where there were times where we made up dialogue, but I'll give you an example of one to sort of show you that we never changed anything substantive. So there's a scene where the cops are walking around the pond looking for, might have been even the scene where they were going to drain the pond. And you had all these reporters there, and they were waiting for something to happen. And so they were walking around the pond, and this is all true. This all happened. And they found a handkerchief with the letter P on it. Mm-hmm. And so I actually wrote that scene. So I had one of those it wasn't the press, it was the cops who found it.
It was two
one of
reporters.
the cops was named Powers. So I knew that they were walking around. I knew that when it happened, I knew that the cops found this handkerchief with the letter P on it. So I had one cop say to, I had the cop Power say to the other cop, does this mean anything to you, the letter P? And the other cop goes, not unless you killed her, because Powers begins with a P. So that was kind of an example of where we just invented something to keep the story flowing, but not any.
It was lighthearted. I liked it. Yeah.
Obviously, we're trying to get this book into as many hands as possible. So if you like Twin Peaks, or if you like true crime, or mysteries, or history, politics, they all play a role. So please, also I think it's good to keep people, to convince people that there's still interest in Twin Peaks out there. I think that, for that reason, we'd like to see the book do well. For that reason, also, to show that Twin Peaks is still viable, and in 10 years.
If you want season 4, buy our book.
Yes, I agree.
Nice. And I've got the hardcover, I've got the Kindle version, I've got the audiobook. But where would you guys recommend picking up this book?
It's definitely in bookstores, and it's also available. You can get it online at your favorite bookseller. You can get it from Fayetteville Mafia Press. They are selling copies of it. Matt Seiss's bookstore, SEITZ, who's a writer for New York Magazine and Vulture, a great film critic and TV critic who's written books about Wes Anderson and Mad Men. Mm-hmm. He's got an online bookstore, and Mark and I signed copies for his bookstore, so he's selling it. Wherever you want to get it, it's going to be, I think, helpful to us and helpful to Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And it's like a prequel to Twin Peaks. It's sort of like the prequel. Yeah.
Multiverse.
Yeah.
Multiverse.
Yes. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being on today's show. Where can people follow you guys on social media?
I am Deer Meadow Radio from the late lamented podcast that may return. So point your browsers back to there. You can still, if you're wanting to check up on Twin Peaks, that material on Deer Meadow Radio was meant to be sort of timeless. So you can go check it out. I think episode 3 is Hazel Drew. I had not listened to it in many years, so it would be kind of funny to listen to it. I'm sure it's very inaccurate, dated, and poor production quality, but it's out there. But also, more significantly, like I said, we do have these kind of catalog of interviews and roundtables and stuff that I think if you're into the book, you would be interested, I think, in hearing like some really funny people in these, some of the locals. The grandson of the Teals Pond, Kenny, the titular Teals Pond, we talked to their couple, 2 or 3 of their grandchildren of the original farmer, and they're just hilarious. You know what I mean? The guy's like flirting, he's like 80, flirting with his wife and all this kind of stuff on the round table. So yeah, Deer Meadow Radio is the keyword for me. That's on Twitter. There's a Facebook page which does have a lot of Hazel Drew stuff on there, pictures and stuff. And hopefully we'll be updating this stuff in the coming weeks and months. And my partner, David Bushman.
Facebook page is called Hazel Drew and Twin Peaks, The Real Story. So you can post there or read about developments there. And on Twitter, I'm at _F as in Frank, M as in Mary, and P as in Peter.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Really nice to talk to you guys again. I don't know if we'll have a chance to see each other again, but hopefully not too long in the future.
Yeah, I don't know if we have to write another book to get back on with you guys or what. But.
Well, I really would like to do this someday. If this pandemic stuff doesn't get in the way, I would love if you gave us a tour of the neighborhood of Hazel Drew. I mean, that would be just mind-blowing, I think, to be able to show us around. And I imagine that the Frosts live right near there. I mean, I don't know if they probably don't want you to say where they live, but I think they're probably in that neighborhood.
David, are we not tentatively planning a couple dates up there in the next couple months? Book signings or something?
Yeah.
I think both in Troy and Sand Lake. I can't remember exactly when, but the historians up there, the historical societies, are both interested in that. So we're going to have events. So
That's
Well, if you
We'll see.
want
I
us
don't
to
know.
come, let us know, and maybe we can
Oh,
see if
absolutely.
we can fit in. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, keep us posted
I'm
when
so
that
excited- I'm
happens.
so
Don't want to
excited
risk
for you
anyone's
guys.
health, but yeah.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you're definitely welcome to come. That'd be great. Great to see you
I
guys.
hope you guys are so proud. You guys are always so, just very calm and collected, but you guys have done amazing work. I mean, this stuff you guys should be so proud of. I mean, 5 years, and it really is such a tight book. I mean, it really
Yeah.
is a solid, tight book that, I mean, I'm just so impressed by what you guys were able to accomplish in this.
Cool cover too, right? Isn't that
Yes.
cover?
Yeah, so cool.
Cover.
So awesome. I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
It's really wild.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
And keep it going, guys. All right.
Please,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe we'll be back in 6 months.
Yeah.
Now, before
As
we
far
go
as
to
I'm
Ryan
concerned,
and I were saying maybe in a month or so we'll do something else. We'll see.
Yeah.
yeah, as far as I'm concerned, you guys are the Twin Peaks community, so you gotta.
We're all in it together. We
Keep
all
us
help
going
each
here.
other out. I almost asked you, David, what your next book was, but I was like, I also want you to enjoy what you have. But it seems like every year, every 2 years, you've got another book out.
I actually have another book written already.
I knew it.
Scheduled. It's about the. Did you guys ever see the movie "The Place Beyond the Pines" with Bradley Cooper and Ryan Gosling and Eva
familiar.
Mendes? Yeah, it's about police corruption up in Schenectady, New York. And that book's written, so that's probably coming out in 2023.
Wow.
Wow, that's awesome. Good for
He
you.
wrote that. He wrote that while he was waiting for my drafts to get back. Like literally, basically, right? Not too
Yeah,
far
I
off.
give you a hard time about the computer and the wallet and all that, but how about the time my battery died on my car? And we had
Yeah,
to,
there were a couple. I didn't want
yeah.
to.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was an adventure.
All right, thank you everybody for being on today's show. We'll be back when we are back, when the time is right. But if you have a comment, question, or theory, give us an email at twinpeaksunwrapped@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Sometimes I'm posting on Reddit. And subscribe to us on Google Play, iTunes, Spotify. And we'll be back in a few weeks, maybe.
See you soon.